What makes peanut butter outperform $30 commercial hog attractants in wet conditions when everything else on the market stops working? Because it does, and the reason has nothing to do with hogs liking peanut butter specifically. It has to do with chemistry that the commercial attractant market has never had any financial reason to explain to you. Last fall, I ran a 4-week side-by-side comparison on a property in Newton County, Texas. Creek bottom, hardwoods with a heavy sounder pattern that I knew well from 2 years of camera data. One stump with commercial attractant on my normal rotation. One stump with peanut butter, same distance from the same trail, same wind exposure. Conditions were variable, which is to say it rained twice and temperatures swung from the mid-60s down to the low 40s across the 4-week period. By week 2, the peanut butter stump was already running ahead. By week 3, the peanut butter stump was producing roughly 3 times the camera visits of the commercial stump, measured in the total photo events per week. The commercial stump had its best week during the dry stretch of weather and essentially shut down the week after the second rain. I want to be careful about how I frame that. It was one property, 4 weeks, my cameras, and conditions I can describe but not fully control. The rain is probably the most significant confounding variable and the one that matters most to understand. I'm not claiming a scientific study. I'm telling you what happened on my ground and what I think the biology says about why. Stick around to the end because there's a modification to the basic stump setup. Takes about 2 minutes. That extends the effective scent throw by a significant margin without spending any additional money. The reason peanut butter behaves differently from corn-based or sweet fruit-based attractants starts with fat. Peanut butter is roughly 50% fat by composition, primarily oleic acid and linoleic acid. These are lipid compounds, and they behave in the environment entirely differently from the water-soluble volatile compounds in sour corn or Jell-O or commercial liquid attractants. Water-soluble volatiles evaporate relatively quickly, wash away in rain, and have a scent half-life measured in hours under field conditions. Lipid-based compounds bind to surfaces, resist rain and humidity, because water doesn't dissolve them, and continue volatilizing slowly across multiple days as temperature fluctuates. A peanut butter application on an absorbent wood surface like a stump in conditions with normal temperature variation will produce detectable scent for 3 to 5 days after a single application. The same surface treated with a water-soluble liquid attractant in rainy weather may be odorless within a few hours. This is the entire mechanism. It's not that hogs prefer peanut butter. It's that peanut butter stays where you put it and keeps working while other products wash off or evaporate. My wife asked me once why I was buying 4 jars of peanut butter at the grocery store when we had 2 already at home. When I explained it was for hog hunting, she stared at me for a long moment and said she was going to start keeping a separate shopping list for me. She has since done exactly that. There's a secondary element that I think matters, but I'll acknowledge up front that I can't fully explain it. Peanut butter contains natural compounds including benzaldehyde, which is also a component of almond and stone fruit scent profiles, and a suite of Maillard reaction products from the roasting process that have a distinctly warm, complex organic smell profile. Hogs that have been pressured away from corn and sweet attractants don't have a learned thread association with those compounds because those compounds don't appear in their pressure history the way corn and fruit smells do on a heavily hunted property. I've seen peanut butter pull hogs on properties where corn setups had been completely stopped by pressure. I'm not certain whether that's because of the unfamiliar compound profile or simply because the fat-based scent traveled further on the wind that particular evening. Both explanations are plausible, and I haven't been able to design a clean enough test to separate them on my own ground. A wildlife biologist would probably have a cleaner answer than I do. I'm working from cameras and outcomes, not from controlled laboratory conditions. The application is simple enough that it barely needs explaining, but the details of where and how you place it change the results significantly. You're looking for a stump that's roughly 2 to 4 feet tall, about waist to chest height on an average adult, that's been standing long enough that the cut surface has weathered and opened into a textured, porous face. Fresh cut stumps work, but they saturate more slowly because the wood pores are still compressed. A stump that's been cut for a year or more has an open grain structure that absorbs the peanut butter into the surface rather than letting it sit on top, where it wipes off on the first animal that contacts it. Apply roughly a 1/4 cup, which is about the volume of a golf ball, directly to the top and upper sides of the stump. Use a stick to press it into the grain. Don't wear gloves that you've touched the jar with and then touched other surfaces near the stump, because you're transferring your own scent chemistry onto surfaces the hog will approach. Separate gloves for the application, handled only with that stump in mind. I know that sounds like I'm overcomplicating it, but I burned a good stump location during a setup in Atala County, Mississippi, by handling the jar and then pushing a camera bracket into the tree above it with the same gloves. The hog circled the setup twice on camera and didn't commit. Change gloves on the next setup. Different result. Coincidence is possible. I don't think it was. Refresh the application every 4 to 5 days. You'll know it needs refreshing when you check the stump and the surface is dry and flat rather than slightly glossy. The scent is still there faintly, but the active volatilization has dropped below the threshold where it's projecting meaningfully on the wind. One thing the commercial attractant market never explains, and that connects to the core reason peanut butter performs so consistently across weather conditions, is that most liquid attractants are formulated for optimal performance in dry, moderate temperature conditions, because that is when most field testing happens and when the marketing photos get taken. The people designing those products are not testing them during 3-day rain events in Louisiana bottomland in November. The hunters buying them are hunting in exactly those conditions, wondering why the attractant stopped working. The fat-based chemistry in peanut butter was not engineered for hog hunting. It just happens to behave the way lipid compounds always behave in the environment: stable, persistent, and rain-resistant. It was doing that before anyone put a camo label on anything. There are conditions where peanut butter does not perform the way the setup is supposed to work, and you need to know them before you invest time in a location. Extremely cold temperatures, below roughly 30 degrees Fahrenheit, which is cold enough that your water bottle freezes if you leave it in the truck cab, slow the volatilization rate of lipid compounds significantly. The scent throw drops to a fraction of what you get in moderate temperatures, and the sub-hour arrival time becomes unreliable. In those conditions, shifting to a heat-based application method helps. A slow feeder or a small solar-powered spin feeder set near the stump keeps some corn moving, and the mechanical action during the warmer midday hours helps activate the peanut butter scent during the period when thermal activity is carrying it further. The second failure condition is bear country. In areas where black bears overlap with your hog hunting ground, a peanut butter stump is going to pull bears before it pulls hogs on any given night. If you're getting consistent bear activity and the hog response you expected isn't materializing, the bears are almost certainly cleaning the stump before the hogs arrive. In that situation, switching to a buried sour cornhole takes the attractant underground, where bear access is harder, and keeps the hog-specific scent profile at the subsurface level, where it's less available to the wider wildlife community. A buddy running 3 properties in LaFleur County, Oklahoma, told me his cold weather fix was mixing 2 tablespoons of peanut butter into a molasses corn batch before deployment, using the heat from active fermentation to keep the lipid compounds volatilizing when ambient temps dropped overnight. I haven't tested that combination directly, but the reasoning is sound and I pass it along as his experience on his ground. Position the stump at least 30 yards from your stand position, roughly the distance from one end zone line to the goalposts on a football field, so the hog's approach to the bait keeps it in front of your shooting lane rather than under your position. Place it on the downwind side of your stand, meaning the wind should be blowing from the stump toward you, which keeps your scent from reaching the hog as it approaches the bait from its natural downwind direction. This sounds like the obvious setup advice for any bait, and it is. The reason I'm spending time on it is that peanut butter produces such reliable, quick results on unpressured hogs that hunters get sloppy about wind because the first 3 or 4 sites produce hogs, and they assume the setup is bulletproof. It isn't. Pressured hogs will work downwind of the stump, pick up your scent from your stand position, and leave without giving you a shot. The bait will keep working. You'll just never know the hog was there until you check the camera. I went through exactly that cycle on a Shecoke County, Arkansas property where I had 4 straight productive evenings and then 10 days of empty camera frames and couldn't figure out what had changed. Went back and checked the data. Wind had shifted on days 5 and 6, blowing from my stand position across the stump rather than the other direction. 2 of those visits almost certainly involved hogs that picked up my position, scent, and left before I knew they were there. The stump never moved. The wind moved. That's what changed. Now, the raccoon problem. Any sweet or fat-based attractant that you put out in hog country will also attract raccoons, possums, and in some areas black bears. With peanut butter specifically, raccoons are the primary competing species, and they'll hit a stump setup within the first few hours of darkness on most properties. The raccoon issue is real, and it deserves a direct answer rather than being waved off. On properties with light raccoon pressure, the raccoon visits are a minor nuisance that doesn't meaningfully reduce hog response, because hogs don't depend on a clean bait surface. They depend on the scent, and raccoons licking a stump don't eliminate the scent from the wood grain. On properties with heavy raccoon pressure, raccoon activity can saturate the site with competing scent that hogs associate with a busy, disturbed location rather than a food opportunity. The practical fix is placement height. If your stump is positioned so that the top surface is more than 4 feet off the ground, roughly the height of the top of a standard door frame, raccoons can reach it but not comfortably work it the way they can a ground-level surface. They'll sample it but not clean it. Hogs are indifferent to height constraints on approach. A 4-foot stump is still well within their reach, and they'll work it aggressively. If you don't have a natural stump at that height, a fence post or a T-post with a small platform board attached at the top creates the same effect. The investment is 2 fence posts and 20 minutes. My wife pointed out that I now have 3 T-posts in the truck for bait platforms and no fence that needs them. She's not wrong that my priorities are in a specific order. You have probably had that evening already. You drove 45 minutes to the property, set up your feeder 2 weeks ago, checked the camera remotely, and it looked good. And then you sat for 3 hours and saw nothing. The camera confirmed it the next morning. Multiple visits starting about 40 minutes after you left. Perfect timing, wrong hunter. That outcome is almost always a wind or approach problem, not a bait problem. The peanut butter stump does not fix those issues on its own. It is the most weather-resistant fat-based attractant I have found, but it still requires the same discipline on approach and wind that every other method requires. Before you go further, regulations. Peanut butter as a hog attractant is subject to baiting regulations in states where bait is restricted for any species, because in most states the wildlife code doesn't distinguish between bait for hogs and bait for deer. In Texas, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, Arkansas, South Carolina, and Mississippi on private land, you're working in a legal environment that generally allows baiting for hogs with no restrictions. If you're in a state where deer baiting is restricted, check your wildlife agency's website before putting anything out. The answer for your specific county takes 10 minutes to find and is worth finding. If you're getting something useful out of this, hit subscribe. More of these coming. The timing claim in the title, under an hour, needs some qualification, because it's the thing most likely to get me called out in the comments, and I'd rather address it directly than let someone else do it. On low-pressure properties where a sounder has been using an area consistently and the wind is favorable, a fresh peanut butter stump application will produce hog contact within 45 to 60 minutes on a majority of evening sits. I've seen it happen in under 20 minutes on 3 separate occasions on a property in Polk County, Florida, that had almost no hunting pressure and a resident sounder that had been established in the same half-mile section of pine plantation for over a year. I've also had setups where nothing showed up for 5 days straight before a sounder finally committed. The timing depends heavily on how close the sounder is at the time of application, what the wind is doing, and how pressured the animals are. On a property where hogs have been shot at over bait recently, they may smell the peanut butter from 300 yards, roughly 3 football field lengths, and circle the area for 2 nights before committing. The sub-hour result is the optimistic ceiling on a good property, not the guaranteed outcome everywhere. You already knew that. But it's worth saying plainly so nobody sets up expecting magic and walks away thinking the method failed when it was really just a property that needed more time. The regional performance variation is worth covering because peanut butter doesn't behave identically in all terrain types. In the coastal plain, sandy soil country of South Carolina, and the Florida Panhandle, the surface soil dries out fast even after rain, and the peanut butter compounds carry well on even modest wind. In the thick bottomland timber of Louisiana and the Mississippi Delta, where the air is often nearly still at ground level and humidity is consistently high, the fat compounds don't project as far because the dense air suppresses the lighter volatile fractions. On my Tensas Parish setup in Louisiana bottomland, I get roughly half the scent throw distance compared to what I see on drier terrain with similar temperature conditions. The fix in high humidity terrain is to use a slightly more generous application, about 1/3 of a cup rather than 1/4, which is roughly the volume of a small egg, and to position the stump on any slight elevation advantage you have. A small ridge, a levee edge, a spoil bank from an old drainage ditch. Even 4 to 5 feet of elevation relative to the surrounding ground gets the scent above the ground level air stagnation and into moving air that carries it further. A hunter on Texas Hunting Forum ran this exact comparison on a property straddling a bayou in East Texas and posted his first arrival times across 8 consecutive setups, comparing flat ground versus a slight ridge position. Ridge position averaged 38 minutes to first arrival. Flat ground averaged 112 minutes. One property, his observation, worth knowing about before you place your next stump. There's one more thing I promised at the start, and it takes about 2 minutes to set up. Here's the situation it solves. Fresh peanut butter on a stump produces strong local scent from the application point. What it doesn't do as well is create a scent trail that leads hogs from a distance toward the stump, the way a hanging bag or a buried hole method does with sour corn. A hog that passes within 100 yards of your stump, roughly the length of a standard football field, will likely smell it and divert. A hog that's passing at 200 yards on the other side of a brush line may not get enough of the scent to divert toward it. The modification is a scent drag. Take a short piece of rope, roughly 3 feet long, about the length from your shoulder to your wrist if you extend your arm, and coat it thoroughly with peanut butter. Drag it on the ground for about 100 yards out from the stump in the direction of the most likely hog approach, leaving a continuous scent trail at ground level that leads from the brush line or the creek bottom directly to the stump. The drag trail doesn't disappear in rain the way a water-soluble liquid attractant scent drag does, because it's fat-based and stays bound to the soil and debris it contacts. A Texas boar's thread from a guy hunting Lavaca County river bottom ran this exact drag method over 4 setups and posted his arrival direction camera data alongside the standard non-drag setups. Every arrival on the drag setups came from the direction of the drag origin. On the non-drag setups, arrival direction was essentially random relative to the stump. The drag created a directed approach that put the hog on the stump from his preferred shooting lane every time. That detail, directing the approach as well as attracting the animal, is the difference between a setup that catches hogs and a setup that shows you hog photos from angles where you can't get a shot. It's the same principle that makes the hole method more effective than a surface port for extended site visits, which I covered in the sour corn video. Controlling where and how the animal commits matters as much as whether it shows up at all. I almost didn't include the drag method in this video because it sounds like the kind of detail that gets skipped when people are in a hurry to get in the woods. But the arrival direction data from that Lavaca County thread is hard to argue with. When a guy documents 4 setups and shows you that every single approach on the drag setups came from the right direction for his shot lane, that's not something you wave off. Peanut butter costs about $4 a jar and covers 8 to 10 setups at the application rate I described. A full season on 2 properties is under $20 in attractant cost. The commercial liquid product that produced similar results in dry conditions on the other stump during my Newton County test cost $18 for a 4-ounce bottle, and it was gone in rain within hours of application. That bottle lasted 2 setups before it needed replacing. Run the math across a full season with normal weather. $18 per 2 setups, 20 setups in a season, that's $180 on commercial liquid attractant for 1 property. The peanut butter covers the same number of setups for less than $8 and stays on the stump through 3 rainstorms. I have no financial interest in telling you to use peanut butter. Jif and Skippy are not sponsors and never will be. The math is just the math. Nobody selling commercial hog attractant has a reason to walk you through this comparison themselves. That's why I am. You've probably spent more on commercial attractants over the last few seasons than you realize, especially if you've been running 2 or 3 setups across a property. Add it up. 2 bags a month at $15 each, 6 months of active hunting, 2 properties. That's somewhere in the range of $360 a year on one line item. The peanut butter version of the same coverage costs under $40 and performs better in the weather conditions that matter most. I'm not saying the commercial products are worthless. Some of them work well in dry conditions. I'm saying the comparison changes significantly the moment it rains, and it rains a lot across most of the best hog country in the South. What I haven't fully resolved in my own testing is whether the 3 times higher visit rate I saw at Newton County was because of the compound profile, the scent persistence, or some combination of both. The compound profile attracts hogs that have been pressured away from familiar attractants. The scent persistence means the setup keeps working through conditions that would shut down a water-based product. Both are real effects. Both contributed to the outcome. I'm not going to claim I've separated them cleanly because I haven't. The honest answer is that both things are probably true and both things matter. And on a rainy fall property where other attractants are washing out by morning, peanut butter covers both problems at once for $4 a jar. The setup I've described costs about $4 and 20 minutes of your time. The drag rope costs nothing if you have any rope in the truck, which you probably do. Find a weathered stump in a location where your cameras are already showing sounder activity. Apply a 1/4 cup of peanut butter into the grain, drag the rope out 100 yards toward the most likely approach corridor, and give it 2 hours of evening light. The camera will tell you what the hogs think about it before you need to form any strong opinions of your own. Run the camera. Let the data decide. Try it on your next site.